The rain at the Oakwood Cemetery in Seattle didn't wash away the grief. It just made the mud slicker under Arthur Sterling's worn-out dress shoes, mirroring the slippery slope his life was about to take. It was a relentless, bone-chilling drizzle, the kind that defines late November in the Pacific Northwest. It soaked through the thin fabric of Arthur's charcoal overcoat, a coat he had bought 10 years ago, back when he still felt like a man who commanded respect. Now, it smelled of wet wool and age, a sharp contrast to the pristine, designer black umbrellas blossoming like dark flowers around the open grave. Arthur stood 6 feet away from the mahogany casket that held his only son, Daniel. At 72, Arthur had built skyscrapers that scraped the clouds and bridges that spanned raging rivers, but he had never calculated the structural load of a father burying his child. It was a weight that threatened to crush his spine. He took a step forward, his hand trembling as he reached into his pocket for a handful of soil. He wanted to say something, a final whisper to the boy who used to sit on his lap and watch the construction cranes dance over the city skyline. "Don't," a sharp voice hissed, cutting through the sound of the falling rain. Arthur froze. A hand with perfectly manicured, blood-red nails gripped his wrist. It was Elena, his daughter-in-law. Even in mourning, she looked like she was posing for a magazine cover. Her black dress was silk, tailored to perfection, and her oversized sunglasses hid eyes that Arthur suspected were completely dry. "You're making a mess, Arthur," she whispered, her voice low enough that the priest couldn't hear, but venomous enough to sting. "Look at your shoes. You're tracking mud everywhere. Just stand back and let the professionals handle this." "He's my son, Elena," Arthur said, his voice raspy from days of silence. "I just want to." "I know what you want," she interrupted, releasing his arm with a shove, wiping her hand on her dress as if he were contagious. "You want attention. You want everyone to pity the poor, frail old man. Well, not today. This is my husband's funeral, and I won't have you ruining the aesthetic with your shabbiness." She turned her back on him, returning to the side of a tall, broad-shouldered man Arthur didn't recognize. The man, Julian, Arthur recalled seeing the name in a text message on Elena's phone once, was wearing a suit that cost more than Arthur's car. He placed a possessive hand on Elena's lower back, whispering something in her ear. Elena didn't pull away. She leaned into him, a subtle, sickening movement that made Arthur's stomach turn. Arthur stepped back, retreating to the shadow of a large weeping willow. He placed his hand on the cold, rough stone of the cemetery gate's pillar. It was granite, solid and unyielding. He ran his thumb over the mortar line. "Foundations matter," he whispered to the whetstone, a mantra he had taught Daniel 1,000 times. "If the foundation is rot, the house falls." He looked at Elena, standing tall and proud by the grave, and he knew, with a terrifying clarity, that the rot ran deep. The ceremony ended in a blur of grey and black. Arthur watched as the guests, mostly Daniel's business associates and Elena's social circle, filed past the widow, offering condolences that sounded rehearsed. No one looked at Arthur. To them, he was just part of the scenery, an outdated relic like the old Ford Taurus parked at the back of the lot. He didn't go to the reception. The thought of watching Elena drink champagne and accept sympathy was too much to bear. He walked to his car, his joints aching from the cold. The engine of the 2014 Taurus sputtered before catching, the heater blasting cold air for the first few miles as he drove away from the city of the dead and toward the suburbs of the living. Willow Creek Drive was a street of dreams. Massive estates sat behind iron gates, their lawns manicured to within an inch of their lives. Arthur had paid for the down payment on number 42, a sprawling Georgian colonial brick mansion, 10 years ago. It was supposed to be Daniel's legacy, a safe haven for his grandson, Toby. As he pulled into the long, winding driveway, the house looked warm. Golden light spilled from the windows, promising heat and comfort. Arthur sighed, the tension in his shoulders releasing slightly. All he wanted was to go to his room in the guest wing, take a hot shower, and sleep for a week. But as his headlights swept across the front porch, he slammed on the brakes. There, sitting in the middle of the driveway, soaking in the relentless rain, were 2 leather suitcases. His suitcases. Beside them were 3 cardboard boxes. The cardboard had disintegrated in the wet, spilling their contents onto the asphalt. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He threw the car into park and scrambled out, ignoring the rain that instantly plastered his thin hair to his skull. He fell to his knees beside the pile. It was his life, scattered like trash. His vintage engineering manuals, swollen and ruined. The framed photo of his late wife, the glass cracked. His drafting tools, rusting in a puddle. "What is this?" he gasped, gathering the wet books into his arms as if he could dry them with his body heat. The front door opened. Elena stepped out onto the covered porch. She had already changed out of her funeral clothes. She was wearing a white cashmere robe and holding a glass of dark red wine. She looked down at him, her expression one of mild distaste, like she had found a dead rat on her doorstep. "You're home early," she said, taking a sip of wine. "I thought you'd linger at the grave." "Elena!" Arthur shouted, standing up, water dripping from his chin. "What is my things doing in the driveway? It's pouring rain." "I'm cleaning house, Arthur," she said calmly, leaning against the doorframe. "New chapter. Fresh start. And frankly, you don't fit the decor." Arthur stared at her, unable to process the cruelty. "This is my home. I live here. Daniel and I." "Daniel is dead," she cut him off, her voice flat and cold. "And the agreement died with him. The deed to this house has one name on it now, Elena Sterling. I checked with my lawyer this morning. You have no lease, no contract, and no right to be here." "You can't do this," Arthur pleaded, his voice cracking. "I have nowhere to go. My pension check doesn't come for another week. I spent my savings on Daniel's medical bills." "Not my problem," she replied. She reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a glossy brochure. She flicked it off the porch. It fluttered through the rain and landed in the mud at Arthur's feet. He looked down. Shady Pines Nursing Facility. He knew the place. It was a state-funded warehouse for the indigent, 3 towns over, known for the smell of urine and despair. "I made a call," Elena said, swirling her wine. "They have a bed in the ward. The bus stops at the gas station down the road in 20 minutes. If you hurry, you won't have to sleep under a bridge." "I am 72 years old," Arthur said, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I built the bridge you drive on to get to the mall, Elena. I am not invalid. I am not garbage." "Then prove it," she sneered. "But do it somewhere else. You have 10 minutes to load your junk into that embarrassing car and get off my property. If you're still here at 4:15, I'm calling the police. I'll tell them you're trespassing and threatening a grieving widow. Who do you think they'll believe? The crying woman in the mansion, or the angry old man screaming in the rain?" Arthur looked past her, into the foyer. He saw a shadow move. It was Julian, walking through the hallway, holding a bottle of whiskey, Daniel's whiskey. He laughed at something, a sound that echoed in the empty space where Arthur's family used to be. "Where is Toby?" Arthur asked, a sudden panic seizing him. "Let me see my grandson. I need to say goodbye." Elena's face hardened. "Toby is staying at a friend's house. He doesn't need to see you like this. Pathetic. Wet. Homeless. I'm doing him a favor, Arthur. I'm cutting the dead weight so he can fly." She stepped back and grabbed the handle of the heavy oak door. "This house is mine now," she said, her eyes flashing with triumph. "You were just a guest. Go die quietly, Arthur." She slammed the heavy oak door in his face. The sound was like a gunshot, final and echoing. Then came the metallic click of the deadbolt sliding home. Arthur stood there for a long moment. The rain ran down his face, mixing with the hot, salty tears he refused to let fall. He looked at the closed door, the barrier between him and the life he had built, the money he had given, the love he had poured into this family. He slowly bent down and picked up the wet photo of his wife. He placed it carefully in the passenger seat of his car. He dragged the heavy, waterlogged suitcases into the trunk. His movements were slow, methodical. He didn't rush. He didn't scream. He got into the driver's seat and closed the door, sealing himself inside the cold, damp interior of the Taurus. He looked up at the house one last time. He saw the curtains in the master bedroom twitch. She was watching him. She wanted to see him break. She wanted to see him drive away broken, defeated, heading for Shady Pines to wait for death. But as he put the key in the ignition, something changed in Arthur's chest. The grief that had been drowning him for days began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard knot of anger. It wasn't the hot, explosive rage of a young man. It was the calculated, dangerous resolve of an engineer who realizes the blueprint is flawed. Sitting in his cold Ford Taurus, Arthur gripped the steering wheel, his sadness hardening into engineer-like precision. Every structure has a stress point. I just have to find hers. Arthur is sitting in the cold, but the fire of revenge has just been lit. If you believe that no father deserves to be treated this way, please drop an 8 in the comments to let me know you stand with Arthur. And if you want to see exactly how he brings this house of cards crashing down, make sure you are subscribed to Dramain Revenge with the notification bell on. The demolition is about to begin, and you won't want to miss a single second. Now, let's turn the ignition. The neon sign of the Starlight Motel buzzed with a dying flicker, the NO in vacancy burnt out, a fitting shelter for a man who had just been erased from his own life. Inside room 104, the air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and lemon-scented industrial cleaner, a scent that tried and failed to mask decades of bad decisions made within these thin walls. Arthur sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the peeling wallpaper. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night listening to the roar of semi-trucks on the nearby interstate, his mind replaying the sound of the deadbolt sliding home at his son's house. He looked down at his wrist. The Patek Philippe watch was scarred with scratches from construction sites, a timepiece he had bought 30 years ago to celebrate his first major bridge contract. He had bought a matching one for Daniel the day he graduated college. Time is the only thing you can't engineer, son, Arthur had told him. Spend it wisely. Now, Arthur wondered if Daniel's watch was currently sitting on Julian Thorne's wrist, or if it had been tossed into a box like garbage. His stomach gave a violent growl. Grief was a heavy burden, but hunger was a primal alarm clock. Arthur stood up, his knees popping in the cold room. He washed his face in the stained sink, using a bar of soap the size of a postage stamp, and put his charcoal coat back on. It was still damp. He walked across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot to the Rusty Anchor, a 24-hour diner that sat adjacent to the motel like a barnacle on a ship. The diner was warm, smelling of bacon grease and strong coffee. Arthur took a booth in the back, away from the windows. A waitress named Betty, whose name tag was crooked, poured him a mug of coffee before he even asked. "Rough night, hun?" she asked, eyeing his wrinkled suit. "You could say that," Arthur replied, his voice raspy. "Just the oatmeal, please. And black coffee." While he waited, Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted the credit card linked to the joint account he and Daniel had used for household expenses. He needed to pay for the motel room for another week. He needed toothpaste. He needed dignity. When it came time to pay, Arthur handed the card to Betty. She swiped it at the counter. She frowned. She swiped it again. She picked up the phone, waited, and then walked back to the table, her face soft with pity. "It's declined, sweetie," she said quietly, sliding the card back across the Formica table. Card reported lost or stolen. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. Elena moved fast. It hadn't even been 24 hours since the funeral, and she had already cut the financial lifelines. She wanted him to starve. She wanted him to crawl back to her doorstep and beg for that spot in the state nursing home. I must have grabbed the wrong one," Arthur lied, the shame burning his ears. He reached into the hidden lining of his coat. There, stitched into the wool, was a small envelope. His emergency fund. Cash he kept for catastrophic failure, an engineer's habit. He pulled out a $20 bill and handed it to Betty. "Keep the change." He didn't eat the oatmeal. He needed to make a call. He pulled out a prepaid flip phone he had bought at a gas station the night before, a burner, untraceable. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Salvage," a gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Sarge. It's Arthur." There was a silence on the line, heavy and pregnant. Then, the voice softened, losing its professional edge. "Artie. I saw the obituary. I didn't come to the service. I know how you feel about people seeing you cry. I'm sorry, brother." I'm not crying, Sarge, Arthur said, his voice steel. I'm in trouble. The kind of trouble you used to handle before you bought the junkyard. Where are you? The Rusty Anchor. Off Interstate 5. Give me 20 minutes. Order me a stack of pancakes. Sarge arrived in 15. Samson Sarge Miller was a mountain of a man, with a beard that looked like steel wool and hands that could crush a lug nut. He wore a grease-stained flannel shirt that hid the scars from his time in Army intelligence. He slid into the booth opposite Arthur, the vinyl groaning under his weight. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Arthur, at the wet coat, the dark circles under his eyes, the shaking hands. Sarge placed a battered, military-grade laptop case on the table. Talk. Arthur told him everything. The eviction. The humiliation. Julian Thorne. The locks being changed. The threats. When Arthur finished, Sarge didn't offer sympathy. He offered action. He opened the laptop, his thick fingers dancing across the keyboard with surprising grace. Julian Thorne, Sarge muttered, chewing on an unlit cigar. Let's see who this Romeo really is. The screen scrolled with lines of code and data. Sarge scoffed. Here we go. Guy's a ghost. Or he tries to be. Real name is Julian T. Miller. No relation, thank God. He's got 3 bankruptcies in Florida. A lawsuit for fraud in Nevada. And get this, he owes 6 figures to a private lending firm in Chicago that has ties to the Albanian mob. He's a con man, Arthur said, nodding. He's desperate. He's bleeding, Artie, Sarge corrected. And he found a host. Your daughter-in-law. He's been her personal trainer for 6 months. He's putting the squeeze on her. That's why she kicked you out. They need the house. They need the assets liquid, and they need them yesterday. They can't sell the house until probate clears, Arthur said, his engineer brain calculating the legal load. That takes months. Unless they don't wait for probate, Sarge said. He clicked a new tab. I set up a crawler bot to scan local listings associated with the address. Look at this. He turned the laptop toward Arthur. It was an auction site. eBay. Seller ID. Queen of Willow Creek. Arthur leaned in, squinting at the screen. His heart stopped. There, pixelated but unmistakable, was a photo of a Fender Stratocaster guitar. Sunburst finish. A scratch on the pickguard shaped like a lightning bolt. It was Daniel's. Arthur had bought it for him when he was 16. Daniel used to play it on the porch on summer evenings. Terrible songs that Arthur loved more than Mozart. Current bid. $400. Buy it now. $1,200. Arthur scrolled down. Vintage drafting tool set. Brass compass. German made. Arthur's tools. The ones he used to design the Seattle Skyline Tower. Men's designer watch. Patek Philippe. Engraved, to Daniel, time is yours. Arthur felt a physical blow to his chest. She wasn't just selling objects. She was selling memories. She was stripping the carcass of his son's life and selling it for scrap metal prices to strangers. She listed these 3 hours ago, Sarge said, his voice low and dangerous. She's bypassing the estate. This is grand larceny, Artie. We can call the cops right now. No, Arthur whispered. He stared at the watch on the screen. He imagined some stranger wearing it, some pawn shop broker melting it down for the gold. If we call the police, the items get seized as evidence. They sit in a locker for years. Or worse, she claims it's a mistake, takes the listing down, and sells them in a back alley where I'll never find them. Arthur looked at Sarge. The grief was gone from his eyes, replaced by the cold blue flame of a welding torch. He reached into the lining of his coat again and pulled out the thick envelope of cash, his secret patent royalties that Elena didn't know existed. How much is in the emergency fund? Sarge asked, eyeing the envelope. Enough, Arthur said. Set up an account, Sarge. An anonymous one. Use a VPN. What are you doing, Artie? Arthur stared at the screen, his finger hovering over the image of his son's guitar. She's selling my son's life for pennies. We're not going to stop her, Sarge. We're going to buy it all. Every single piece. Sarge's salvage yard was a fortress of rusted metal and barking dogs, but inside the main office, it hummed with the sophisticated cooling fans of a military-grade server rack. It was a jarring transition, from the chaotic heaps of crushed sedans and twisted rebar outside to the sterile, blue-lit sanctuary of data inside. Arthur sat on a metal stool, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He watched Sarge's fingers fly across a mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic clacking the only sound in the room. On the desk, Arthur's anonymous PayPal account was draining fast, buying back pieces of his son's life one click at a time. But that was just damage control. The real mission was about to begin. "All right, Artie," Sarge said, pausing to crack his knuckles. "We've secured the assets. Now let's talk about the house." Arthur nodded, his expression grim. "The cameras. Are they still active?" "If she didn't find the hardline, they should be," Sarge replied. "You said you air-gapped the system." "Completely," Arthur explained, his voice steady with engineering pride. "When I renovated the house for Daniel 10 years ago, he was paranoid about corporate espionage. He wanted a security system that couldn't be hacked from the internet. So I built him a closed-loop network. The cameras record to a physical server hidden in a sub-basement behind the wine cellar. No Wi-Fi. No cloud." "Smart," Sarge grunted. "But if it's offline, how do we see it from here?" "I built a backdoor," Arthur said. "For emergencies. There's a cellular transmitter in the utility box on the street. It's dormant. It only wakes up if it receives a specific encrypted handshake. I gave you the key on that USB drive." Sarge plugged the drive into his console. He typed a command line that looked like gibberish to anyone else. "Initiating handshake. Pinging the node. Come on." A progress bar appeared on the large central monitor. It crawled agonizingly slow. 10%. 40%. If she hired a pro to sweep the house, they might have found the transmitter, Sarge warned. "Elena doesn't hire pros," Arthur said coldly. "She hires pretty people. Julian wouldn't know a cellular bridge from a toaster." The bar hit 100%. The screen flickered green, then resolved into a grid of 9 camera feeds. "Bingo," Sarge whispered. Arthur leaned forward, his breath hitching in his throat. He was looking inside his own home. It was strange, violating almost, to see the familiar rooms from these high angles. The living room was a mess. Empty wine bottles cluttered the coffee table. "There they are," Sarge pointed. In the kitchen feed, Elena was laughing. She was wearing a silk blouse, holding a glass of white wine. Julian was leaning against the granite island, the island Arthur had installed himself, eating an apple. He looked comfortable. He looked like he owned the place. "Turn on the audio," Arthur commanded. Sarge adjusted a slider. Static hissed, then voices cut through. "So the lawyer says probate could take 6 months," Julian was saying, his mouth full of apple. "Can we speed that up?" "Don't worry, babe," Elena replied, her voice tinny through the smoke detector microphone. The old man signed the agreement for the stipend. "He's out of the picture. We sell the assets for cash now, pay off your investors, and then we list the house in the spring. By the time anyone realizes the furniture is gone, we'll be in Miami." "God, I love you," Julian smirked, reaching out to pull her close. Arthur looked away, disgust rising in his throat like bile. "I've seen enough of this. Go back to the archives." Tuesday night. The night he died. Sarge asked softly, "Do it." Sarge typed in the date. The live feed vanished, replaced by a timestamp. Tuesday, November 26th, 8:14 p.m. The kitchen was empty. Then, Daniel walked into the frame. Seeing his son alive, walking, breathing, was a physical blow to Arthur. Daniel looked tired. He was wearing his running gear, his face flushed. He poured a glass of water, his hand shaking slightly. Then Elena entered. She wasn't wearing workout clothes. She was dressed for a night out. She was shouting. There was no audio on the archive feed yet. Sarge was working to isolate it, but her body language was screaming. She pointed a finger at Daniel's chest. Daniel slammed his glass down. Water splashed on the counter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He waved it in her face. "What is that?" Sarge asked, squinting at the screen. "I don't know," Arthur whispered. "Zoom in." The image pixelated, but the letterhead was visible. Genetics lab. A DNA test, Arthur realized, his blood running cold. He found out. He knew about Toby. On the screen, Daniel was furious. He shouted something, pointing at the door. He turned and stormed toward the hallway, heading for the stairs. Elena followed him, still screaming. "Switch cameras," Arthur ordered. "Stairwell." Sarge switched feeds. The angle changed to the top of the landing. Daniel appeared, climbing the stairs. He looked winded. Halfway up, he stopped. He clutched his chest. He reached for the banister, missed, and crumbled. It wasn't a dramatic fall. His legs just gave out. He sat down heavily on the step, then slumped sideways. He didn't move. Elena appeared at the bottom of the stairs. She stopped. She looked up at him. "Call 911. Arthur shouted at the screen, forgetting it was a recording. "Help him. Pick up the phone." Elena didn't move. She stood there, one hand on the railing, watching her husband gasp for air. Sarge pointed to the timestamp. 8:17 p.m. "She's just standing there," Sarge whispered, horror in his voice. Daniel's hand twitched. He was reaching for her. Begging. Elena took a step back. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. Finally, Arthur let out a breath. "She's calling." But she didn't put the phone to her ear. She looked at the screen. The blue light illuminated her face. She tapped something. She swiped. "She's not dialing," Sarge said, his voice flat. "She's scrolling. She's checking social media." Arthur felt the room spin. He gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles turned white. He watched the timestamp tick forward. 8:20 p.m. Daniel was still moving. Shallow breaths. 8:25 p.m. Elena walked to the kitchen, poured more water, and came back to watch. 8:30 p.m. Daniel stopped moving. Only then, when his chest had stilled, did Elena put the phone to her ear. She waited another 10 seconds, messed up her hair to look frantic, and then began to speak, her face contorting into a mask of fake panic. "Oh my God," Arthur choked out. He shoved himself away from the desk and stumbled to the corner of the room. He retched into a metal trash can, his body violently rejecting the reality he had just witnessed. Sarge paused the video. The image froze on Elena's face, illuminated by the cold light of her phone while her husband lay dead feet away. Arthur wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He stood up slowly. He felt cold. Colder than the rain. Colder than the grave. The grief that had been a heavy cloak was gone, burned away by a white-hot fury that clarified everything. "That's not a stroke," Sarge said quietly. "That's depraved indifference. In this state, that's murder too." "She watched the clock," Arthur whispered. "She timed it. She let him die to keep the money. To keep the house." He walked back to the screen. He touched the image of his son's still body. "Save it," Arthur commanded. "Copy everything. Make 3 backups. 1 on the drive, 1 on your server, 1 in the cloud." "Done," Sarge said. "What now? Do we call the cops?" "No," Arthur said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, hollow, like wind whistling through a tomb. "If we call the cops now, she gets a lawyer. She pleads panic. She says she froze. She gets a plea deal." He turned to Sarge, his eyes hard as flint. "I want her to think she won. I want her to walk into that lawyer's office tomorrow thinking she owns the world. And when she's standing at the top of the mountain, that's when I push her off." Arthur grabbed his coat. "I'm going to bury her, Sarge. Not in the ground. Under the weight of her own greed." Arthur has seen the truth, and there is no turning back now. If you are as horrified as I am by what Elena did, drop a 1 in the comments to show that you demand justice for Daniel. And if you aren't part of our squad yet, hit that subscribe button for Dramain Revenge and ring the bell. You do not want to miss the moment Arthur makes her pay for every second she watched that clock. Your support keeps these stories coming. Now, let's see the plan in action. Arthur sat in the dim light of the motel room, watching the Buy It Now button on the auction site pulse like a heartbeat. Each click was a reclamation of his son's dignity. The laptop screen was the only source of illumination in room 104, casting long, dancing shadows against the peeling wallpaper. Beside him, Sarge monitored the bank transfers on a second screen, his face grim. It was Thursday night. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving Seattle in a damp, heavy mist, but inside, the atmosphere was electric with silent warfare. "She just listed the first edition Hemingways," Sarge muttered, tapping a key. "Asking price, $200. Those books are worth $3,000, easy." Arthur felt a twitch in his jaw. Those books were a birthday gift he had given Daniel when he was accepted into college. "She doesn't care about value," Arthur said, his voice low. "She cares about speed. She needs cash to pay off Julian's loan sharks before they break his kneecaps. If you can't stop the flood, you divert the water." It was a lesson he had taught Daniel years ago when they were building a dam in the creek behind the house. "If the pressure is too high, son, let it flow where you want it to go, not where it wants to break you." Elena was the flood. Arthur was about to become the diversion channel. He moved his cursor over the green button. He was logged in under the username justice_served_72. Click. Transaction complete, the screen flashed. Payment sent via PayPal. Arthur printed the receipt. The whirring of the portable printer sounded like a weapon cycling a fresh round. This piece of paper wasn't just a receipt, it was evidence. By law, everything in that house belonged to the estate until probate closed. By selling them for personal gain, Elena was committing theft and fraud. "Next," Arthur commanded. "Vintage Fender Stratocaster," Sarge read out. "Condition. Used. Price, $800. Arthur closed his eyes for a second, remembering the sound of Daniel playing that guitar on the porch, terrible, off-key chords that sounded like heaven. Click. Bought. Patek Philippe watch. Engraved. Click. Bought. Drafting tools. Brass. German. Click. Bought. For 2 hours, they worked in tandem. Elena listed a memory. Arthur bought it back. He spent over $25,000 of his secret patent royalties. He imagined Elena on the other end, sitting in his living room, watching the notifications ping on her phone, high-fiving Julian, thinking they had hit the jackpot with some gullible collector. She had no idea she was selling the evidence of her own crimes to the man she had thrown out in the rain. "That's it," Sarge said finally, leaning back in the creaky chair. "She's out of inventory. The house is stripped." Arthur gathered the stack of warm paper from the printer tray. He placed them neatly in a folder marked evidence. "Good. Now we have the theft to go with the murder." He stood up and checked his old watch. "I have a meeting with Thaddeus in an hour. Pack the gear, Sarge. We're moving out of this rat hole tomorrow." The offices of Vance and Associates were located on the 40th floor of a steel and glass monolith downtown. Thaddeus Vance, Arthur's oldest friend and the city's most feared estate attorney, sat behind his mahogany desk, his face pale. On the large monitor on the wall, the video from the black box had just ended. The image of Elena checking her social media while Daniel took his last breath was frozen on the screen. Thaddeus took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, but his expression was hard as granite. "I've defended some monsters in my time, Arthur," Thaddeus said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "But that is pure evil. We hand this to the district attorney, and she goes away for 20 years. Minimum." "Not yet," Arthur said, placing the folder of auction receipts on the desk. "If we arrest her now, she fights it. She uses the money she stole to hire a defense team. She drags Daniel's name through the mud. I want her broken first." Thaddeus opened the folder. He flipped through the receipts of the stolen items. A slow, shark-like smile spread across his face. Grand larceny. Theft from an estate. Fraud. You've been busy. "I want everything back, Thaddeus," Arthur said. "The money. The company. The legacy. And I want her out of that house." Thaddeus leaned forward. "About the house." I pulled the original deeds from the archives this morning. You were right about the structure of the deal 10 years ago. The ground lease, Arthur said. Exactly, Thaddeus confirmed. When you funded the construction, we set up a split title to protect the asset. Daniel owned the improvements, the bricks and mortar. But the land? The land is held in a 99-year lease by the Sterling Trust. And the lease has a termination clause. Upon the death of the primary tenant, Arthur recited from memory. Correct, Thaddeus said. The moment Daniel's heart stopped, the lease expired. Technically, right now, Elena is squatting on your property with a structure you don't want there. You have the legal right to demand she remove her property, the house itself, within 30 days, or it forfeits to the landowner. She thinks she owns it, Arthur said. She thinks she can sell it next week. She's in for a rude awakening, Thaddeus said, closing the file with a satisfying snap. The reading is set for noon tomorrow. I'll have the papers ready. Are you sure you can handle this, Arthur? It's going to be brutal. Arthur stood up. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city he had helped build. I built bridges that can withstand earthquakes, Thaddeus. I can handle a gold digger. The final stop was a small, exclusive tailor shop on 4th Avenue. It was the kind of place that didn't have prices in the window. Arthur walked in, the bell chiming softly. He caught his reflection in the three-way mirror. He looked tired. His coat was shapeless. He looked like the victim Elena wanted him to be. I need a suit, Arthur told the tailor, an elderly Italian man who barely looked up from his sewing. Off the rack is in the back, the tailor mumbled. No, Arthur said, his voice projecting the command voice he hadn't used in a decade. I need bespoke. Charcoal grey wool. High count. And I need it ready by tomorrow morning. The tailor looked up, assessing him. He saw the shoes, wet, but expensive leather. He saw the watch, scratched, but a Paytech. He saw the eyes, uncompromising. That will be expensive, signore. And a rush fee. Arthur pulled out the envelope of cash. He placed a stack of hundreds on the counter. Fit me. For the next hour, Arthur stood still as the tailor measured his inseam, his shoulders, his chest. With every pin that was placed, Arthur felt the old man shedding away. The poor father-in-law was disappearing. In his place, the titan of industry was returning. The man who managed million-dollar budgets and fired incompetent contractors without blinking. He didn't buy the suit to look good. He bought it as armor. As he walked out of the shop, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Elena. Don't be late tomorrow. We want to get the title transfer done quickly so you can get your $100 charity check. Try to shower, Arthur. The smell of desperation is hard to get out of the upholstery. Arthur stared at the screen. He didn't feel the sting anymore. He felt the anticipation of the trap snapping shut. He typed a reply, his thumbs moving steadily. I'll be there. He went back to the motel room and laid the garment bag on the bed. He smoothed the fabric of the new suit. Beside it, he placed the folder of evidence and the USB drive containing the video of his son's murder. She thinks she's walking into a coronation, Arthur whispered to the empty room. She has no idea she's walking into a demolition. The conference room on the 40th floor of the Vance Legal Tower offered a panoramic view of Seattle, but the only storm brewing was inside the room. Arthur arrived exactly at noon. He wore his old, stained raincoat buttoned all the way up to his chin, hiding the bespoke charcoal suit underneath. He wanted them to see the victim one last time. He wanted them to feel safe. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of sterile corporate coldness and aggressive celebration. Elena sat at the long mahogany table, dressed in a white power suit that looked sharp enough to cut skin. Next to her sat Julian, wearing one of Daniel's ties, a silk Hermes pattern Arthur recognized immediately. He was leaning back in his chair, checking his phone, looking bored and rich. When Arthur shuffled in, clutching his battered hat, Elena let out a dramatic sigh. Finally, she said, checking her watch. We were about to start without you. Though, honestly, I don't know why you're even here. Glutton for punishment, Arthur. I'm just here to hear what my son wanted, Arthur said, his voice raspy. He took the seat furthest from them, a wooden chair set against the wall, isolating himself from the winners at the table. He wanted me to be happy, Elena snapped. That's what he wanted. Now, Thaddeus, can we speed this up? I have a realtor meeting me at the house at 2. We're listing it today. Thaddeus Vance sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. He opened a thick leather folder. He didn't look at Elena. He looked at Arthur, a quick, almost imperceptible nod. We will proceed with the reading of the last will and testament of Daniel Sterling, Thaddeus announced. Article 1, Thaddeus read. To my wife, Elena Sterling, I leave the entirety of my estate, including my investment accounts, my personal effects, and the structure located at 42 Willow Creek Drive. Yes. Elena shrieked, jumping up and high-fiving Julian. I told you. Everything. The house is mine. Julian grinned, a predatory smile. 5 million in assets, babe. We are golden. Please sit down, Mrs. Sterling, Thaddeus said, his voice cutting through their celebration like a razor. I haven't finished. What else is there? Elena laughed, falling back into her chair. Did he leave the old man a set of golf clubs? Or maybe just his regrets? However, Thaddeus continued, his voice dropping an octave. The document I just read is dated 5 years ago. I must now read the codicil, a legal amendment, signed and notarized in this office 3 days before Mr. Sterling's death. The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. Elena's smile faltered. What? A codicil, Thaddeus repeated. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder. It was sealed with red wax. He cracked the seal. The sound echoed like a bone snapping. I, Daniel Sterling, being of sound mind, do hereby revoke all bequests made to Elena Sterling due to irrefutable evidence of her infidelity and the fraudulent misrepresentation of paternity regarding the minor child, Toby. Liar! Elena screamed, slamming her hands on the table. That's a lie. He never wrote that. You forged it. The signature was witnessed by 2 notaries and recorded on video, Thaddeus said calmly. And attached to this codicil is a DNA test result from the Seattle Genetics Lab. It confirms that Toby is not Daniel's biological son. He is the son of Mr. Julian Thorne. Julian froze. He looked at Elena, his face draining of color. You told me he didn't know, he hissed at her. He didn't. Elena shouted. He couldn't have. He found the email, Mrs. Sterling, Thaddeus said. The night he died. That's what you were arguing about, wasn't it? Elena went pale. She sank back into her chair. It doesn't matter, she stammered, trying to regain her footing. Fine. So he knew. But we're still married. I'm still his widow. The prenup says I get half. And the house is in my name. I signed the quitclaim. I own the house. You are correct, Thaddeus said, leaning forward. You own the structure. The bricks. The glass. The roof. Exactly. Elena pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. So you can take your little DNA test and shove it. I'm selling the house, and I'm taking the money. There is just one problem, Elena, Arthur spoke up. He stood slowly. He reached up and unbuttoned his stained raincoat. He shrugged it off, letting it fall to the floor in a heap. Underneath, the charcoal grey bespoke suit fit him like armor. He straightened his spine, growing 3 inches taller. The frail old man was gone. The Titan was back. He walked to the table, his footsteps heavy and authoritative. Thaddeus, Arthur said. Explain the ground lease. Thaddeus smiled, a shark smelling blood. 10 years ago, when Arthur funded the construction of the estate, we separated the title to protect the asset. Daniel owned the improvements, the house itself. But the land, the acre of prime real estate it sits on, that is held in a 99-year ground lease by the Sterling Trust. Thaddeus turned the document around to face Elena. The trust is controlled by Arthur Sterling, and Clause 14b states that upon the death of the primary tenant, the ground lease terminates immediately. Elena blinked, trying to process the legalese. I don't. What does that mean? It means, Arthur said, leaning down so his face was inches from hers, "that you own a very expensive pile of bricks that is currently trespassing on my dirt." "Trespassing?" she whispered. "I am exercising my right as the landowner," Arthur said coldly. "I want my land cleared. You have 30 days to pick up your house and move it somewhere else. If you fail to do so, the structure is considered abandoned property and ownership reverts to me." "Move the house?" Julian choked out. "You can't move a brick mansion." "That sounds like an engineering problem," Arthur said. "And I'm retired." "You can't do this." Elena screamed, grabbing Julian's arm. "We have debts. We spent the money. I sold the jewelry. I sold the car." "We know," Thaddeus said. He opened a second folder. "We have the receipts. Grand larceny. Theft from an estate. You sold assets that didn't belong to you yet. That's a felony, Mrs. Sterling." But. Elena looked around the room, her eyes wild, searching for an exit that didn't exist. "We haven't done anything wrong. It was just bad luck. Daniel died of a stroke. You can't punish me for a tragedy." "A tragedy?" Arthur asked softly. "Is that what you call it?" He nodded to Thaddeus. Thaddeus picked up a remote control and pointed it at the wall-mounted screen. "We have one last exhibit." The screen flickered to life. The grainy black and white footage from the kitchen appeared. Elena gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. The video played. Daniel collapsed on the stairs. Elena stood there. She checked her watch. She checked her phone. She scrolled. She waited. The room was deathly silent, save for the hum of the projector. 25 minutes, Arthur narrated, his voice devoid of emotion. "You watched the clock while my son suffocated. You didn't call 911 because you wanted to make sure he was dead. You wanted to make sure he couldn't change the will." On the screen, Daniel's chest stopped moving. Elena started to shake. It began in her hands, then spread to her shoulders. "No," she whimpered. "No, I didn't. I froze. I was in shock." "That's not shock," Thaddeus said. "That's depraved indifference. That's murder." Julian stood up, knocking his chair over. "I wasn't there," he shouted, backing away from Elena. "I didn't know. She told me it was a stroke. I'm out of here." He turned to run, but the double doors to the conference room burst open. "Police. Nobody move." 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a cheap suit stepped in. Julian ran straight into the detective, who shoved him against the wall and slapped handcuffs on his wrists. "Julian Thorne," the detective said. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." Elena stood up, swaying. She looked at the police. She looked at the video of her dying husband. She looked at Arthur, who stood like a statue of judgment. The reality of it hit her all at once. The money was gone. The house was gone. Her freedom was gone. The weight of her own greed finally crushed her structural integrity. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled. Without a sound, she collapsed, hitting the expensive carpet with a heavy thud. Arthur looked down at her unconscious form. He didn't feel joy. He didn't feel triumph. He just felt the cold satisfaction of a job finished. "Structural failure," Arthur whispered. "Total collapse." The smelling salts snapped Elena back to reality, but the reality she woke up to was far worse than the nightmare. She was in handcuffs, and Arthur was standing over her like a titan. The chemical sting burned her nostrils, forcing a ragged gasp from her lungs. She blinked rapidly, her vision clearing to reveal the sterile conference room, now filled with the chaotic energy of law enforcement. Julian was already being marched out the door, his head hung low, flanked by 2 officers. Elena tried to move her hands, but the cold steel bit into her wrists. She looked up and saw Arthur. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smiling. He looked at her with the impartial detachment of a judge delivering a verdict. "Garrison." "Arthur," she stammered, scrambling to her feet, her white suit now smudged with dirt from the carpet. "Please. You can't let them take me. I'm family. I'm the mother of your grandson." "You are not family," Arthur said, his voice level. Family protects each other. You watched my son die to protect your bank account. You are a structural failure, Elena. And I just condemned the building. But Toby, she wailed, tears streaming down her face, real tears this time, born of terror. What about Toby? He needs me. Toby needs a mother, not an accomplice, Arthur said. He leaned in close, his eyes hard. And he certainly doesn't need the man who helped you kill his father. The detective stepped forward, gripping Elena's arm. Time to go, Mrs. Sterling. Elena dug her heels into the carpet. She looked at the door, then back at Arthur. I have nowhere to go. You took the house. You took the money. Arthur straightened his coat. He looked at her one last time, remembering the rainy afternoon on the porch when she had tossed his life onto the driveway. Get out, Arthur said, repeating the words she had spat at him 3 days ago. The free ride is over. She screamed as they dragged her out. It was a raw, ugly sound that echoed in the hallway long after the elevator doors closed. Then, silence returned to the conference room. Thaddeus Vance exhaled a long breath and removed his glasses. It is done, Thaddeus said quietly. The DA will have a field day with the video. She won't see the outside of a cell for 20 years. Arthur didn't feel the rush of victory he expected. He just felt tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that settled into his marrow. And the boy? Arthur asked. The door opened again, and a woman in a sensible grey suit entered. It was Mrs. Alvarez from Child Protective Services. She carried a thick file. She looked sympathetic but firm. Mr. Sterling, she said, sitting down. With the mother in custody and the biological father, Mr. Thorne, also arrested, you are the next of kin. We know there is no biological relation to you, but you have been the psychological grandfather figure. We are prepared to grant you emergency custody. Arthur stared at the DNA test lying on the table. Probability of paternity, Julian Thorne 99.9%. He closed his eyes. He thought of Toby, the 10-year-old boy who loved Legos and mint chocolate chip ice cream. The boy who had Daniel's smile but Julian's eyes. For 10 years, Arthur had loved that boy. But now, every time he looked at Toby, what would he see? Would he see his son? Or would he see the betrayal? Would he see the face of the man who conspired to destroy his family? Resentment is a structural rot. It starts microscopic and eats the foundation until the whole building comes down. Arthur knew he couldn't build a future on a foundation of lies. No, Arthur said softly. Mrs. Alvarez blinked. Excuse me. I cannot take him, Arthur said. His voice was steady, but Thaddeus saw the tremor in his hands. I am 72 years old. I am a single man who just buried his only son. I cannot raise the child of the man who helped kill my boy. I am not that strong. If I try, I will end up resenting him for sins he didn't commit. He deserves better than a grandfather who looks at him and sees a ghost. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Alvarez pressed. He will go into the system. No, he won't, Arthur said. He pulled out his checkbook, the one Elena had mocked. He wrote a number. A big number. $500,000. He tore the check out and slid it across the table. This is an irrevocable educational trust, Arthur said. It pays for his therapy, his private schooling, and his college. He gets the principal when he turns 25. Find him a good home, Mrs. Alvarez. A family that doesn't know his history. A family that can look at him and just see a boy, not a crime scene. Give him a fresh start. This is very generous, Mrs. Alvarez whispered, staring at the check. It's penance, Arthur said, standing up. It's what Daniel would have wanted. He loved that boy. I'm honoring my son by making sure the kid has a future. He walked to the window and looked out at the grey Seattle skyline. It was the hardest decision of his life. It was cruel, perhaps, but it was honest. And in engineering, honesty was the only thing that kept the bridge standing. 2 weeks later, the bulldozer arrived at 42 Willow Creek Drive. Arthur stood on the sidewalk, watching. He didn't sell the house. He didn't list it. He ordered it demolished. He wanted the structure gone. He wanted the ground cleared. The heavy machine roared to life. The claw raised high and crashed down onto the roof of the master bedroom. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. The neighbors stood on their porches, watching in shock as the mansion was torn apart. Arthur felt a phantom weight lift from his chest with every crash. That house was a tomb. It was where his son died alone. It was where the lies had festered. When the dust settled, only the foundation remained. Arthur walked through the rubble. He found a single object lying in the dirt near where the kitchen used to be, a small, plastic fishing lure. One he had bought for Toby. He picked it up, brushed off the dust, and put it in his pocket. Then he turned his back on the ruins. He told the foreman to sell the land and donate the proceeds to the Daniel Sterling Engineering Scholarship at the State University. He got into his Ford Taurus. He didn't look back. 3 months later. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and deep water. Arthur sat on a weathered wooden dock extending out into a quiet lake in Wisconsin. It was miles away from Seattle. Miles away from the noise, the lawyers, and the rain. Sarge sat beside him in a folding chair, a cigar unlit in his mouth. They hadn't spoken in an hour. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was the comfortable silence of 2 old soldiers who had survived the war. Arthur's phone buzzed on the wooden slats of the dock. It was a jarring, modern sound in the ancient quiet of the woods. He picked it up. It was an email notification from the university. Subject: Scholarship Fund established. First recipient selected. Arthur read the preview. 20 kids from low-income families would be going to engineering school next fall, fully paid for by the sale of the Sterling estate. 20 kids who would learn how to build things that lasted. He looked at the screen. The device that had shown him his son's death. The device he had used to buy back his dignity. It was the last tether to the pain. "You done with that?" Sarge asked, nodding at the phone. "Yeah," Arthur said. "I'm done." He stood up. His knees didn't ache today. The mountain air was good for them. He walked to the edge of the dock. He weighed the phone in his hand. It felt heavy, like a brick of lead. He pulled his arm back and threw it. The phone arced high into the air, spinning end over end, catching the sunlight one last time. It hit the water 50 feet out with a satisfying splash. It sank immediately, plunging into the cold, dark depths of the lake, taking the bank alerts, the emails, and the memories of Elena's screaming face with it. The ripples spread out, widening until they disappeared into the calm surface of the lake. Arthur sat back down and picked up his fishing rod. The line was tight. There was something on the hook, a fighter. He felt the vibration travel up the rod, into his hands, grounding him. "Got one?" Sarge asked. "Yeah," Arthur smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first one in a long time. "I think it's a keeper." He reeled in the line, the gears clicking rhythmically. He was 72 years old. He was alone. But for the first time in a long time, the foundation held. He was solid. He was standing. Arthur reels in a fish. He is at peace. In the end, Arthur Sterling proved that a legacy isn't built on blood or bricks, but on the integrity of our foundations. While the mansion on Willow Creek crumbled under the weight of greed, Arthur discovered that true peace only arrives when we are brave enough to clear the rubble of the past and forgive ourselves for the things we cannot fix. What would you have done in Arthur's shoes? Would you have taken custody of the boy, or was walking away the ultimate act of love? Please share your wisdom in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story of justice satisfied your soul, please consider joining our family here at Dramain Revenge by subscribing, where the truth always finds a way to the light.